So you mentioned earlier in this conversation predecessor energy. Did I say that right?
Predecessor, either
Yeah,
way is correct.
yes. Okay. So I want you to explain kind of what that is and like how does that even come about? What is that?
I am, that's another really great question. Predecessor energy is the energy of an action that took place in a location before you got there. And the echo of that action is still influencing that location to this day. And
Oh,
there's a story of a couple who bought a house in Colorado. And as unbelievable as this is, neither real estate agent disclosed to the couple that a serial killer murdered 5 women in his living room. And
oh,
the agent put new carpet down so nobody would see the bloodstains in the wood floor. They
oh
didn't
my
like,
God.
and when they moved in, no disclosure, nothing. When they actually moved in, the place was so haunted because 5 women were still there. The energy of violence was echoing in the walls, the screams, the imagine their fear echoing
Yeah.
into the walls, into the nails, into anything metal in that house. Metal holds energy. A tiny example of predecessor energy is, somebody's missing, so they give that person their keys, and the psychic feels the keys. What are they really doing? They're feeling the auric residue on the keys and that predecessor energy, and they're picking up what's going on with the person. They're making a connection. Because when you
Mm.
understand what happens on an etheric level, blows your mind. You begin to see this massive new world of understanding open up. And again, I'm grateful to you for having me on your show to share these concepts. This isn't wild and crazy. This is science 101 because energy is
Yeah.
neither created nor destroyed. All energy ever does is change shape. So when energy changes shape, or in a house, it changes hands. Now this couple with kids comes in and they're hearing screams and it's cold and they're angry all the time and nobody's getting a night's sleep. What happens? It's a nightmare. It's just a nightmare.
Yeah.
And so when you see that, you you realize, I mean, that they actually were on 60 Minutes. It was so bad. And they were so furious with the real estate agents for not warning them.
Oh
Well, of
my
course, if the real estate
goodness.
agents revealed it, they couldn't sell the house. And so if you bring a psychic in who's going to burn a little white sage, that's not going to do anything. Take somebody with some horsepower. We moved from San Diego, had to get out of California. We moved from San Diego to Washington State, wink, wink. And my real estate agents had sold our San Diego house, were the loveliest people you'd ever want to meet.
Mm.
And a couple months, I guess a year later, they said, we have a house in National City, a suburb of San Diego, and there was satanic ritual done in the house. And every single potential buyer who walks in is so creeped out. Some of them just run screaming out of the house. And she showed me the satanic stuff all over the walls. Well, let me tell you, they painted the walls, they replaced the there's blood on the carpet, they replaced all that. It didn't make any difference because the predecessor energy of who they were and what they did was still echoing out, throb. If you thought about it as something that throbs, or if you cut
Mm.
your hand, you have a scar. It's a scar on the house. So they called me and they said, can you clear this house? They sent me before pictures and after pictures. So I said, sure. I mean, it's kind of what I do. So I remote viewed the house and it was really, really bad. And I went back through some months of stacks of time. This is another new term, stack of time. if you look at how long ago an event took place, it's in a stack of time. If you looked at a stack of books,
Mm.
the story of what took place is in this book, and then there's a new story. So those are all
Yeah.
time stacks of predecessor energy. Isn't this fascinating? I sort,
Yeah.
it's sort of
And
like mental popcorn.
that's a lot of energy.
it's a massive amount of energy. So I cleared the house. It took me a couple days, but I cleared the house. And 3 days later, the house sold. And she said people walked in and said it felt great. Now, let's take a very radically different example, a dentist's
Mhm.
office. Several
Oh
years ago,
gosh.
there was a friend of mine in Asheville, North Carolina, who had an office on the second floor. And no matter what he did, he feng shuied it. The business, he tried and tried, his business wasn't working. So can you remote view and see if you can figure out what is going on? So I can look at the column of energy from the below the floor to the top floor, because that column of energy is what he's paying for, because he's on a second floor. And the
Mm.
first thing I saw was a dentist's office. And this was not a good dentist. Ooh, he was not good. He caused a lot of pain for people. And apparently
Oh.
that dentist went bankrupt. But the energy of the pain, the fear, and the anguish was throbbing or echoing in the wood and all the metal parts, even though the dental fixtures, the chairs and the sinks, had all been removed. That energy was there. And when I told them that, I said, feels like there was a dentist. They said, yeah, he was really bad. He went bankrupt. I said, well, there you go. I said, I have cleared to the degree I can, but I honestly recommend you move, because it's a tough
Man.
thing. We're going to do some things with feng shui, because I am a feng shui practitioner, to push that energy back. But you may want to consider a different location, because the energy in this entire building is not conducive to what you're trying to do. And he did move to a new place and was remarkably successful. I had a real estate
Mm.
agent in La Jolla, California, and all of her office was fine, but her assistants who were out in the central office were always sick. They were sick over and over. Well, I can't remote view below them. I don't have any jurisdiction, because when you do remote viewing, you have to follow spiritual law. If if my client doesn't own the property, I don't have any jurisdiction to remote view it. I said, however,
Mm.
we took feng shui mirrors and we placed them face down. So whatever energy seemed to be coming up from the ground, which is what I could feel, we returned that energy. It's like someone turned a switch. They weren't sick anymore. But the massage
Wow.
parlor business below them went under, closed. And the massage parlor was removing all this toxic dark energy from people, and it was rising up into the assistants who were in the outer office of the real estate agency. That's a small example of predecessor energy. When you start to really wrap your brain around this, you go, oh my gosh, that explains this and that explains this. And if you looked at, a, a, a graveyard or a battlefield, whether it's in Europe or wherever there was a battle, if you look at that, you will see you wouldn't want to live on that property, because there's a part of you that knows, oh my gosh, there was a lot of violence took place on this land. I don't
Yeah.
want to be surrounded by the energy of that violence. But let's make this even more complicated. I had a client in Tennessee, and she said, can you remote view my property? I said, what are you feeling? And she said, it's funny. I don't really feel anything, but I feel like there's something. So I said, okay. So I
Mm.
remote view back through stacks of time. It's kind of an odd skill. But what I found were Cherokee Indians, Native American tribe, who during the time of President Andrew Jackson sent them on the Trail of Tears to Oklahoma. And this man told me how he was dying and his tribe left him in place on this woman's, as it turned out, her 18 acres, and his job was to be the guardian of the land. He was the kindest, sweetest
Wow.
man you'd ever want to meet. And so I brought in an angel for him, and I said, I think this nice lady's going to take care of the land. And he said, it's time to go. And I said, it's time to go. And so he left. So now I'm going
Mm.
back through, and I'm moving into more modern times. And there's a guy there in a business suit in her kitchen watching her. Whoa. So I said, what are you doing here? And he said, I'm not real sure. The last thing I remember is I was in Virginia Beach and I was crossing the street and I was on my cell phone. And I think a woman on her cell phone in her car hit me and killed me. And there was a woman who was walking by, and I think I went home with her, and now I'm in Tennessee. I'm not even sure how this works. Am I really dead? Yes, sir, you are most assuredly dead, because you can see that you're in the clothes you died in. You don't change clothes once you're dead. So if you didn't wear anything when you died, oh well, it's going to be a surprise for the psychic. So, um, and that's happened too. So when that happens, and I explained, and he said she's really nice, and I'm not harming her. He said, but I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I said, well, did you see the light? And he says, yeah, but I'm not religious. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Okay, so I brought in an angel and I had him crossing over. Okay, so that's two different stacks. And then I'm continuing to look, and I see this little. She looks like she's about 10 years old, and she's
Mm.
hiding in a corner. And I finally find her, and she said, I said, sweetie, what are you doing in this lady's house? And she said, she's a right nice lady, you know, and she don't hurt nobody. She don't hurt nobody. She's nice.
Wow.
Okay. And I said, it looks like you're pretty badly injured. Yeah, my daddy beat me. And he beat me, and this one day he just plumb killed me. I, I think I'm dead now. And the
Oh.
only nice place I could see was her kitchen. Why did my daddy beat me? Why? And so I had a conversation with her, brought in some children angels, and then they crossed her over. And then as she crosses over, her absolutely filthy clothing, her arms were badly, badly broken. I think the girl died of shock from so much pain. What was
Mm.
done to her? Um, her the pain left her, and she was embraced by this really beautiful light. And then I didn't find anything else on those 18 acres. I mean, I have story after story after story. I can go on and on.
Oh my goodness.
So when you
Wow.
start looking at the things that happen on a property, you can't believe how much it influences you. I remote viewed a house in upper state New York, and she said, we're having all these problems. I said, don't tell me. Let me see what I find. I'm working and working. The first thing I see is back in the 1500s, late 15, early 1600s. I'm seeing the Oneida Indian tribe, Native American tribe, the Oneida Indians.
Mm.
And I'm talking to the shaman, and I'm seeing in the background all these people, and I'm looking at that stack of time. There's fire everywhere because the white settlers brought blankets full of smallpox, handed them to
Mm.
the Indians, and they all died. They had
Wow.
nothing against it. Well, a lot of the settlers died too. They didn't have any immune system because they were starving to death themselves. So they burned
Oh my
their
God.
houses and they burned the Native American. There were special. They didn't have. They had special dwellings. I'm not remembering the right word. And so all of that was burned. So now what you have is the predecessor energy of fire. Fire energy lingers a really, really long time. And so I helped remove the energy of the fire. And I talked to the shaman, and it was really heartbreaking. He talked about watching the children die, watching how angry people were that he couldn't heal them, he couldn't help them. And he said, "Why do they come? No one invited them. What's wrong with these people that they're so cruel to us?" And so you have his anger, resentment, and the energy of fire and death and pestilence, all on one piece of property and probably the surrounding area.
Mm.
And once you have that, you really have to work to clear it. And let me assure you, when you have something that significant that goes back 400 years, little sage isn't going to cut it.
Yeah.
And so by clearing and clearing and clearing, and I could also see that the house in modern time has had repeated fires because the fire energy continues to linger. So when I talked to
Yeah.
the family and I told them this, they said, "How could you possibly know? We've had 3 fires in this house." I said, "Well, because that's what the predecessor energy is telling me. And anytime there's anger," and she said, "We're angry all the time in this house." I said, "Well, you might not be anymore. You can raise the frequency using Mozart, and a lot of the tools in the books that I've written will help you to have a higher frequency house, which calms the energy of fire, anger, rage, and deep emotional pain." So, okay, let me stop for a minute. I've been chattering here.
Wow. Wow. Oh my God. Wow. Okay. I completely understand what predecessor energy is now. I think that is very, very clear because, as you said, energy, it doesn't die, it just transforms into something else. Okay. So now, okay. So what would you advise when we're moving around, right? We move around, we rent places, we buy land, we buy property, we set up businesses. I guess are we look should we be looking into the history of these areas? You said sage doesn't work, salt doesn't work, the energy, the frequency of it is not high enough to do away with a lot of that energy that was there before. So what do we do? You mentioned Mozart, right? What do we do when we have to do life and we don't know what the hell happened how many years ago, and we're just trying to buy our first house or open our first brick and mortar? What do we do?
I think that's a really great question because once you have an awareness of it, then you look at how many people have lived there before you. Well, if you're getting an apartment in Rome, you might as well figure it's 1,000, it's about 10,000 years of people living there. So you kind of have to go
Sure,
with the
yeah.
territory. But where we're living here, no one's ever lived on this property before except the builder, and he only lived here for 3 years. So when I cleared the house and I remote viewed it before we purchased it, the land has been logged, but and things grew back, but the trees are at least 100 years old. So it's a pretty clear piece of property. But the property 2 houses down, in the space of 18 months, both people who lived in that house got divorced.
Mm,
So since no one had actually lived on that property since the first owner, what happened? And that one's, I
mm,
suspect there's it's complicated, but there's a ley line And when you have a crossing of earth energy lines, sometimes you can have something that's really difficult. So if you look at a situation where, is it a series of divorces? Was there violence in the house? What happened in the house before you got there? Why are people selling? Go knock on doors, talk to the neighbors. Sometimes what you'll see is, if you have a business, there's a story of a place in a big box store in Virginia Beach. So they have this piece of property for big box stores, like a Staples or Home Depot or Office Depot, big store. Fire after
Mm,
fire after fire after fire. And finally, they made it a park because, and the water of the park put the fire out. Find
mm,
out, if you can, what happened before. But let's say you take your kid to college, and how many hundreds of kids have lived in that room? All
yeah.
right. Well, I use something called dragon's blood as a resin, not an herb, which sage is an herb. And people use Palo Santo. It just doesn't have enough horsepower. Dragon's blood. And then there's also, and then if you want to create which clears a property, it does it. I mean, not everybody's going to be able to remote view through stacks of time. It's an odd skill set. So in the
Yeah.
interim, yes, you can clean it. You can bring in what called iconography, which is pictures of angels. Um, beautiful words. Have things feng shui. Use feng shui mirrors. But the one of the biggest things that clears a property, a room, is something called dragon's blood. And it's a resin from Sumatra. Other parts of the Middle East grow it. The trees are amazing. The Catholic
Mm,
Church has been using it for probably 2,000 years to clear churches. When
of
they
course they
walk
have.
down the aisle with that thing that swings, which is a thurible, it's not filled with sage. It's filled with dragon's blood. And
I
it
believe that.
clears it clears that church. Well, let's say that you take your kid to college and you're in an apartment, you're in a, dorm room. Well, you don't know whether or not some kid committed suicide from that room, somebody overdosed in that
Mm,
room, somebody was raped in that room. You don't know any of those things because kids are so transient. Or if you get your first apartment in a location, you can knock on doors, but a lot of times people don't want to talk to you. Sometimes they're
true.
just afraid. So, out of respect, take care of yourself. That's why in this book, Psychic Children, Psychic People, chapters 39 through 41, I give explicit directions for the use of dragon's blood, not incense. See, people say, well, I'll just get dragon's blood incense. It's full of fillers. It's not the same thing. It has to be the pure incense. And when you burn it in a resin burner, which looks, this is a resin burner. This particular one is from Young Living. And you can buy
Mm,
them from Young Living, or actually you can buy them on Etsy. Not Etsy, eBay, which is where a lot of people get them. And what this
mm,
stuff does is it when it melts, it looks like this sticky red blood. It's red. That's why they call it dragon's blood. Once
mm,
you've cleared it, all right, now you want to raise the frequency. So you're going to use frankincense, myrrh, and another resin called benzoin. You burn that in the same resin burner on a little piece of aluminum foil. Now you're raising the frequency and raising that frequency. Smells really good. And the gifts to the Christ child by the three magi
mm,
were gold, frankincense, and myrrh. But nobody ever asked, well,
mhm,
why did they give him frankincense and myrrh? Because they're
mm,
so sacred and they're so powerful. So if myrrh turbocharges the energies of frankincense, it's sacred. Everybody in the Middle East uses it. I actually make frankincense water to drink because it creates
mm,
a really super high positive frequency in the body. So when you're burning that and you're playing Mozart, there are some other tools in that book that I suggest people look at. because when you use these tools and you build a habit to use them, or you set some things in place that are going to put you in a good place for a long time, what that does is it causes you to be able to think clearly. With the
Mm,
amount of 5G right now, with the amount of stuff in the airways, shall we say, you need to feel as clean and clear as possible. These, just a little bit of dragon's blood, some Mozart that you play on low during the day, will calm things. You can also clear your car. Let's say that you got a car coming off a lease, or you bought a used car. You don't know what happened in that car. Um,
mhm.
there's a. Do you have time for one more story?
Yeah, of course.